Murfreesboro Storytellers is next. Our special guest is Dr. Carroll Van West, Director, Center for Historic Preservation at MTSU and newly named Tennessee State Historian. Welcome to Murfreesboro Storytellers. This month we're originating from the Heritage Center, 225 West College Street in downtown Murfreesboro, and our guest is Dr. Carroll Van West, Director of the Center for Historic Preservation at MTSU. Van, welcome.
Thank you very much, John. Good to see you today.
Good to have you. And more particularly, we're having Dr. West as our guest, as newly named State Historian, appointed by Governor Haslam, I believe, earlier this year.
Back in July, I got that unexpected phone call.
Well, congratulations. Is this a term appointment?
Yes, it is. A term for 4 years.
All right.
And I already have a pretty full agenda, so it looks like it'll be a busy 4 years.
I can imagine. We knew Mr. Walter Neal Durham from Gallatin was your predecessor, who passed away earlier in the year, and we're so delighted that you are now the state historian. Exactly what does that entail, Van?
Well, it depends on the governor. Governor Haslam has made it clear that I'll be used in several different ways. I've been involved with some different ceremonies. Of course, that's often an appropriate role for a state historian. But I'm heavily involved with the Civil War sesquicentennial events here in Tennessee. I'll be heavily involved with some of the different issues of state history that come to the attention of the governor's office. I get to review proclamations or help staff answer questions regarding Tennessee history or events. So I really see myself as a support role there. And then I also will be working closely with the Tennessee State Library and Archives on some of their programs. Particularly, we're planning to do a State of Tennessee History report that will supply to, of course, all the citizens of the state, but also the different branches of government. Who's doing what are the success stories, what are the challenges, what are the needs of the whole, let's say, heritage industry in Tennessee.
So this will be a record of the present situation, historically speaking?
Yes.
For use in future generations,
and to also just look at the numbers that are involved. How many people are coming to the different historic sites and museums across Tennessee? How many people are using the different archives? Because there's the state archives, but of course Rutherford County has a very wonderful archives here, as do many other counties. How many citizens are benefiting from this? I think the numbers will really sort of impress everyone.
I'll bet. Which are the most heavily visited historic sites in Tennessee?
Well, the most heavily visited historic site is Graceland. Graceland is on the National Register of Historic Places. And, you know, a lot of people go there just for the story of Elvis, but if you go there, you really get a good history lesson about popular culture and music in Tennessee in that time frame. The Great Smoky Mountains, a lot of people go there, of course, for just hiking and the mountain vistas, but it has many different historic sites too. So the second most visited historic site is Cades Cove, the Appalachian village there in East Tennessee.
As far as Rutherford County, I presume Stones River Battlefield would be the one?
Stones River Battlefield is certainly the most visited property here, and one of the most visited Civil War battlefields in the state. Stones River benefits from its proximity to large population areas. It's by an interstate, and when you compare that to like Shiloh, which is a great historic battlefield, and also Fort Donaldson, another really good site, but they're sort of far away from people and from highways. So Stones River gets a heavy visitation.
So the others are not nearly as accessible then?
No.
Any big event planned for the year, or any specific observance that you as state historian will be working toward?
Well, the two events coming up fairly soon here in both Chattanooga and Bristol. One is the Civil War Sesquicentennial Commission is having what it calls a signature event, a 4-day event in Chattanooga talking about the battles of Chattanooga. Not only Chickamauga, whose anniversary happens in September, but also the different battles to take control of Chattanooga that happened in October and November. And that event is on October the 9th through 12th at the Chattanooga Convention Center. And then on October 17th, I'll be up in Bristol, where the state is going to formally dedicate its series of Welcome Center exhibits that they have done on the Civil War. They asked me to help them with those. And that was a special project of the State Building Commission. They funded it, and then I worked with the Department of Tourism and the Department of Transportation. We're the only state in the country to have those type of special exhibits about Tennessee's role in the Civil War at every one of our welcome centers in Tennessee. So we're really proud of that, and Lieutenant Governor Ramsey is having a dedication ceremony there in October 17th.
Very good. You mentioned the Battle of Chickamauga, and I've always heard over the years locally that we claim the Battle of Stone River was the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. I've been in Chattanooga when somebody there also claimed that the Battle of Chickamauga was the bloodiest battle. Does it make any difference?
Well, you know, what it just underscores is just how terrible the Civil War was.
Good point.
I mean, those numbers that people still want to use for casualties, you know, the way that we account for battle deaths and wounded and those missing today is so much more intricate than it was back then. It's really hard to know the numbers who died, but in working with Tennessee communities for this past 3 years on the sesquicentennial, what I have been really amazed at is the number of civilian deaths. It maybe it's just a shooting like in Rogersville. We're studying this house there where the owner of the house went downtown to a bank and someone just shot him. And someone left a diary account of just how it all happened. They ended up shooting each other. One died. One went on to serve with distinction in the Civil War. And you come across those different accounts and you realize hundreds, if not thousands, of Tennesseans died as civilian casualties. So yeah, the numbers from the Civil War are just staggering.
Well, the Civil War history has been quite a part of Rutherford County here over the years. You mentioned the large number of visitors to this community. So it's quite a tourism attraction.
Well, it is, and one thing that we try to add to that here at the Heritage Center is an exhibit that shows all of the different properties in Murfreesboro and Rutherford County, because the National Park Service at the battlefield does an excellent job of interpreting and telling the story of that battle at Stones River. But you know, a few months before, in the summer of 1862, you had a major battle here around that courthouse. Urban warfare was part of the Civil War, and this was one of the first battlefields of that urban war here in Murfreesboro around the square. And then you have the Battle of Hoover's Gap that happens in 1863, and then just like a lot of Tennessee counties, with federal occupation, you've got guerrilla warfare taking place throughout 1862, 63, and 1864. So yeah, the Rutherford County has a huge Civil War story to tell, both at the battlefield, but also here in the historic downtown.
Tell us a little bit more about the Heritage Center where we're located for this program. Is this a locally governmental sponsored location for preservation of history?
The Heritage Center is really a sort of unique experiment that has really proven out. It was launched 7 years ago when Main Street Murfreesboro and the Center for Historic Preservation, we went down and had a meeting with city officials looking for possible support for our idea to have a joint office that would serve community needs for meetings, but also help to tell the story of the downtown. Because we don't have a museum in downtown Murfreesboro, and this would help serve that purpose. And the city graciously said, we have a building in mind that we could provide for you, and it was this old hardware store. Now, at first everyone thought, well, this isn't the ideal building, but we all said, no, wait a second, it's got parking in front. You can always find a parking spot here, and it's a big open building that we can actually show what historic preservation does. It takes old buildings and find new life for them, and that's been the case here. This has just been a great building used for all types of meetings, and I know later this week there is a meeting of the National Parks Conservation Association, a big support group for national parks across the country, and they're having a reception here because they've heard about the building and they just want to see what it's all about.
Tell us a little bit about the displays that you have right now in the building.
Well, we always try to balance the county's nationally known Civil War story, because that is a big part of the exhibitry here. We do have a big national story, and we're a proud part of the Tennessee Civil War National Heritage Area. But the other permanent exhibit we have here is one on Murfreesboro, because we particularly like to tell the story sort of between the two world wars, what we call the Jazz Age. And of course, the Jazz Festival that they have on the square every May is one of the biggest events that happen downtown. So we try to tell the building of the dairy industry, and the Carnation milk plant still has that stack that everyone sees every day downtown. The building of the university and its expansion during those years, the building of public schools, the prominence of Bradley Academy back in those days. So we tried to look at all of those different stories that make Rutherford County a really interesting place in the 20th century, as well as, of course, its earlier Civil War story.
You mentioned Carnation. I can remember growing up when the town sort of started and ended the workday with the factory whistles that blew at the Carnation milk plant.
Right. Well, that was just a huge turning point in the town's history when it got that corporation from outside of the area to come down and build this modern dairy plant that really did link the farmers of the county to the town.
And back in those days, we certainly were claimed to be the dairying center of the South.
Well, I think you
rightly
were.
so.
I mean, the Carnation plant coming into Murfreesboro and its success then led to other major dairy producers to look at Middle Tennessee. For example, Borden Milk Company then built a plant down in Fayetteville. But Carnation was the first and really did put Murfreesboro on the map.
You mentioned Bradley Academy. I believe that brought James K. Polk to Murfreesboro for his early education, didn't it?
Right. You know, Bradley Academy has such a great history because you've got that very early history when it was the leading private school in the town. And then with the coming of the Civil War, it became an African-American school. And it served that purpose for decades after that. And they built that new building in about 1917, right at the end of the First World War.
A new building, you're talking about the one on Academy Street.
The one that's now the museum. They really do a great job there. And you know, what we try to do with all of our displays here is really encourage people to go out and visit these places. So we have brochures galore. We do driving tours on the county. We do a walking tour of downtown. And then we always have all of the information about the different museums and historic sites in the county, because this is a good way to get people to really know this town and to know this county. So many people have moved here in the last 20 years, which is great, but they often come here to sort of find out, well, what's the story? What's the story behind this name? What's the story behind this building? And this is a great way for us to involve our graduate students in historic preservation. MTSU is such a strong partner of the town. I think everyone realizes that. But Dr. McPhee really gives us the opportunity to share our expertise with people in the town and with visitors through the support of the Heritage Center.
So the Heritage Center ties right in, as you already said, to your Center for Historic Preservation.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. We need it, you know, we can often do laboratory opportunities for students with old buildings across the South. But for students who wanted to work in, you know, giving historic interpretation and giving historic tours, and students who wanted to work on exhibits, well, we didn't have a place for them to do that. And this place allows them to learn those skills and develop top-notch exhibits. The students have been behind every exhibit that's here at the Heritage Center.
Well done. The Center for Historic Preservation, does that offer a major, or how is that done academically?
The Center for Historic Preservation works with the Department of History to prepare students in public history. They have a public history program here at MTSU that works both at the master's level and at the PhD level. Okay. And students then usually will focus within the public history field in historic preservation or in museums or in archives. And then of course there's the students who want to do all three, and those are students that we often like as well because we have all three things always going on here at the Center for Historic Preservation.
What displays do you have about the history of MTSU here at the Heritage Center?
Well, we have rotated those through. Right now, we don't have one up, John. That's a great question because we're getting ready for a special exhibit that's coming in about Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address.
Okay.
Because the 150th anniversary of that comes up in November. But we have, in the past, had a good exhibit about Murphy Center and all of the music events that took place in Murphy Center from the beginning to the present. And that was a very popular exhibit. And then we had one of our undergraduate students who then stayed on to do her master's degree, Sarah Beth Gideon. And Sarah Beth, for her honors thesis at MTSU, did an exhibit about competitions at MTSU, particularly the marching band competitions, the old football bowl games that used to take place.
Not the refrigerator bowl, but the Grantland Rice Bowl.
The Grantland Rice Bowl. And in fact, in doing all of that research, we found a film of the Grantland Rice Bowl, a 16-minute film from the year TSU played in it. And we had that cleaned up, copied, and we were showing that here during the time. So of course a lot of alumni wanted to come down and see that little bit of snippet of history. It was like just 15 minutes because this was before everything was televised. It wasn't much, but it was enough to sort of remember what those games were like and also how little the football field was in the 60s compared to where it is today. So, you know, we really let the students sort of guide us on those MTSU exhibits because then that's a great way for them to do what's really meaningful to them during their college careers.
And of course the Grantland Rice Bowl, named for one of our natives, Grantland Rice, one of the great sports writers of our country.
Right. Well, Rutherford County's been blessed with that, hadn't it, with famous writers coming from it. Grantland Rice, Mary Knowles, Murphy, you know, some really important people in the arts and letters of Tennessee.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as any other plans for the Heritage Center, you say you have the work coming up about
Abraham Lincoln and the
Gettysburg
Address.
And the Gettysburg Address.
Well, and then next year we'll be doing a major overhaul of all of the exhibits. You know, museums tend to look at exhibits as having a 5 to 10 year, you know, shelf life. These have been up for 7 years, so we're starting that process next year.
You have a display over here now about the James K. Polk Hotel. Many people probably do not know we had that hotel here for many years.
Oh yeah, and it was such a landmark on the old Dixie Highway. And that's a theme that we really want to pick up and do more with. The building does stand on the old Dixie Highway, and transportation has played such a role in Murfreesboro's history. We want to emphasize that more in the new exhibits.
You mentioned Dixie Highway earlier, that College Street, where we're located today, is on the former Dixie Highway. Tell us a little about the history of the Dixie Highway and what it meant to this area.
Well, the Dixie Highway was the first big north-south interstate to come through Tennessee. Now, they didn't call them interstates back then, and it wasn't funded by the government. It was really a sort of private initiative to designate an improved road that would run from Chicago all the way down to Miami. Murfreesboro was right in the middle of the Dixie Highway. So that's one reason you had the James K. Polk Hotel built here. You knew you had a lot of people stopping over for that long drive from Chicago to Miami. So it just meant so much because it really opened us up and put us on that major corridor. Just as important as the railroads had been to the town 100 years before. So the Dixie Highway was important from 1920 to after World War II when they built Broad Street. Then that really changed the traffic patterns once again.
One of the interesting displays that you have here is an aerial view of downtown Murfreesboro
Right.
in 1941. Where did you find that?
We found that at the Tennessee State Library and Archives. The State Library has really been working hard in the last 2 or 3 years to find all of their old photos that people have given them over the years, particularly different state agencies. This came from a state agency, and they have been digitizing those so people can easily copy them and use them in exhibits or in programs or whatever they would care to use them in. And they found this one, and we had never seen it before. And it is a really great view. It shows you how much of our historic downtown we still have here, because we do have so much, and the downtown business owners have been such good stewards of these special places. But then it also shows you places that have been lost. And particularly this building was a parking lot in 1941. So this building is part of that story of change as well.
Was the original building that went on this site with the location of Acord Hardware, I believe?
Yes, it was. It was a hardware store initially. Then it became Murfreesboro Realtors offices. It served as a dress shop, and then it became a very popular restaurant before we converted it back to this community use.
As a matter of fact, it may have been Osmond Harold Hoover before it became Acord, but it was a hardware store back in those days.
It certainly was.
Looking again at the aerial view of downtown, the Rutherford County Courthouse certainly has been the center of this community for so many years and a very important part.
Well, and that's one of the things that all of the students who work here at the Heritage Center really enjoy getting to do, and that is to take groups through the county courthouse. If groups want to arrange a tour of the courthouse, they just need to contact the Heritage Center. And the students know what an important building it was, not just from the Civil War period, but up throughout time. And there's so many events that took place either inside of that courthouse or around on the courthouse grounds. It really is the heart of the community.
Certainly has been. Then, about your background getting interested in history and historic preservation, has that always been a passion of yours all your life?
Well, I have to admit that it was. And you know, some of the things that tempted me early, as my mother would remind me, was first seeing the old Charlton Heston movie about Andrew Jackson and the Hermitage. I built a papier-mâché model of the Hermitage when I was 5 years old. And then I saw the movie with John Wayne as Davy Crockett in the Alamo, and I built one of the Alamo. But then that was just stuff you did as a little kid. I had teachers at Mitchell Nelson Elementary who really encouraged me in all of that. So I really have to give them the credit for, along with my parents, you know, nurturing my love for history.
What is your academic preparation for the position you're in now?
Well, you know, MTSU plays an important role in that. I always saw myself as a student of Dr. Robert Corlew back when he was department chair and teaching all of the Tennessee history courses. He wrote the Tennessee history textbook. And he was a tremendous influence on my career as an undergraduate. And then I went to the University of Tennessee, where my major professor there was Dr. Paul Bergeron, who wrote the next textbook on Tennessee history. But then I went on to the College of William and Mary for my PhD, and I worked at Colonial Williamsburg.
Oh boy.
And it was at Colonial Williamsburg that I really got my training and love for historic preservation, that you need to merge scholarship along with the actual places where history took place. So that's what I have tried to do ever since, and certainly tried to teach my students that you need to know your facts and know your history and know the scholarship, but it always means more when you can actually put people at the place where something happened.
You mentioned some of the early movies you saw encouraging you as far as your interest in history. Were those seen at the Princess Theater?
Yes, they were seen at the Princess Theater. That was the only place to see movies at the time I was 5 and 6 years old. I mean, they built the movie theaters out at the shopping center at Jackson Heights a little bit later. But in those early days of going to movies, it was always at the Princess.
The Princess Theater was quite a location in downtown
Oh, it
Murfreesboro,
certainly was.
where the Pinnacle Bank is located now. I guess
Right,
is
just across the street now, basically, from where the Heritage Center is.
Do we have more and more people that are interested in history and knowing from whence we come and what our background is Is that a, I don't want to call it a growing part of public life today?
Well, I think so. And, you know, let me just use some examples from
Please.
Tennessee and TV and some of my students. You know, the guys who do American Pickers have opened up their operations in Nashville. And one of my former students, Lauren Grisham, who interned here for 3 years at the center, she runs that store. And one thing that those guys have found out that really motivates all pickers is the stories and the history and the connection between things. So, you know, that's a very popular show. You have the popular shows that run on Nashville Public Television all the time. You know, documentaries are an important part of their programming, and the Civil War documentaries that we have done for Tennessee have been some of the most highly rated programs they have shown in the last several years. And then those programs have shown across the country. I had a student who works in Seattle call me up and say, prepare me next time you're on TV. I turned that on and didn't expect to see Tennessee and you on TV in Seattle. And you know, that's great that the Tennessee story is getting carried across the nation. So television is important for that. We see our visitation, heritage tourism is such an important part in the state, and its numbers are really up. The Commissioner of Tourism reported on that last week. So just tremendous interest out there.
Is your budget for the Heritage Center through MTSU and the Center for Historic Preservation?
Yes, it is.
Any funds coming to you from the city of Murfreesboro or the county of Rutherford?
The city provided us with the building, which is a major contribution. Right. The county always is very generous every year in supporting us with an amount of money that we use for the exhibits, for the tours, for programs at the courthouse, and we always try to put whatever money we get in from the public back into public programming, and so everyone can benefit from that. MTSU provides us the funds for the staff and the graduate students who work here. We don't want to put any of that burden on the community. We want to take the community's money and make things better with tours and brochures and all of those materials.
Well, this has been a wonderful facility here for promoting our heritage and our history, and I just commend you for what you and your staff and the faculty have done to make it so. If you had one wish, one thing that you would like to have more than anything else to make this facility even bigger and better, well, what would you ask for?
Wow, what a question. Oh, what I would love to have, I can tell you what I would love to have. I think something that gets lost in our history is our decorative arts and some of the great craftsmen that we've had working in the city and county throughout the years. So yes, if someone wants to donate to us some good Murfreesboro-made furniture, I would love to have that, to put that out front to say we contribute to all aspects of Tennessee culture, not just history, but also into the arts and the decorative arts too.
Wonderful. That would be an interesting addition to the center.
It really would be.
Van, we thank you very much for joining us. We've had our guest, Dr. Carroll Van West, the director of the Center for Historic Preservation at MTSU, and newly named and newly appointed by Governor Haslam as our Tennessee State Historian. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, John.